This morning we're reading from Rays of the One Light. These are commentaries comparing the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita. They're based on the teachings of Paramhansa Yogananda and written by Swami Kriyananda. This week's topic is, by thinking, can we arrive at understanding? Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. There are many places in the gospel where we see Jesus in open conflict with the Pharisees. That is to say, with man-made as opposed to true mystical tradition. In the Gospel of St. Matthew, we see a good example of how they and he locked horns. Then some of the scribes and Pharisees from Jerusalem came and asked Jesus, "Why do your disciples break our ancient tradition and eat their food without washing their hands first?" Jesus, after scolding them for their hypocrisy and observing lesser rules so carefully while ignoring the much more important ones, said, "Listen and understand this thoroughly. It is not what goes into a man's mouth that makes him common or unclean. It is what comes out of a man's mouth that makes him unclean." It wasn't that Jesus counseled against such wholesome practices as washing one's hands before eating. In an age, however, when lesser rules were given too much importance relative to the truly important observances, cleansing the heart of impure desires, for example, he emphasized the supreme importance of loving God and of communing with him. The Pharisees, the orthodox religionists of his day, in other words, had brought true religion down to the level of intellectual hair-splitting. They mistakenly considered the way to understanding to lie within a minefield of definitions, which they tried to refine to ultimate exactitude. Jesus taught, however, that the intellect alone can never lead one to truth. Without love and deed, there is no ultimate truth. Without fixity of purpose, born of the heart's devotion, the intellect wanders endlessly. It cannot settle for long on anything. As the Bhagavad Gita says, the intellects of those who lack fixity of spiritual purpose are inconstant, their interests endlessly ramified. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. I love these words. It is what comes out of a man's mouth that makes him unclean. So our purpose on the spiritual path is self-realization. That's the name of our religion, our Sanatan Dharma, our way of life. We're trying to control our little selves in thought, in word, in feeling, in action, and learn to behave, as Sri Yukteswar so colorfully put it. We have to learn to behave. And we learn by studying the scriptures, by studying the teachings of our gurus. Then we know what the right thing is. When we're caught in a dilemma, we have reference. I can't tell you how many times I've been stuck with a feeling or not understanding something or a problem, a decision to be made. And I'll go to the scriptures, praying, "Help me. I need direction, I need help, I need some clue as to what to do. I can't think my way through this. And it is uncanny. There it is. The scriptures are a love letter to all of us. The scriptures are there just as they have been for people for thousands of years, but it doesn't make it irrelevant now. It's always relevant because human nature is the same. It's a little more complicated right now, I think. Too many screens and too much radio and television and movies and video and the news and all of the input that we get daily, that's new. But just as this Bhagavad Gita passage says, the intellects of those who lack fixity of spiritual purpose are inconstant, their interests endlessly ramified. Those endlessly ramified interests are what come back to us when we sit to meditate. And we're thinking, oh my God, what if the government shuts down? Oh my God, what if this person wins the election or that person wins the election? You know, there's all this input, and then we wonder why we can't be still. We have to control those endlessly ramified interests. We're studying in the Raja Yoga course the yamas and niyamas, which if you can't name all 10, I'm not going to give them to you right now. So go home and find those and think about those again. But those 10 are from Patanjali, the great exponent in ancient times of yoga. But yoga was long before Patanjali. So there were many more yamas and niyamas. He just chose the ones he thought were the most important. But recently, in recent years, Dharmadas discovered the earlier yamas and niyamas, and one of them I think about every day. It's called mitahara, and it means measured diet. So, as someone who loves sweets too much, you know, you can't live on sugar, although I've tried it. But now I'm in a period, once again, where I'm tightening my belt and no sugar. And it's a fight. Sugar's more addicting than heroin, I've read. So mitahara means creating a measured diet for yourself. It can mean, you know, portions that are measured. It can mean eliminating sugar if it is poisonous to your system. It can mean all those things, and also it can mean measuring your mental diet. I've started limiting my screen time, and my phone, I look for it, it's everywhere, it's always right here, but it's not here right now. My phone keeps track of how long I'm on it every day, and it's good to be honest and look at those numbers and see, is that really what you want to do with your life? Life is very short, and that reminds me of this article that I came across reading the news. This was entitled 50 Phrases That Only Southerners Use. And I was born and raised in Ohio, Ahia. And I knew most of those 50 they were happening around me. But there was one I had never heard of before, speaking about how life is short. So this saying is, today you're the rooster, and tomorrow you're the feather duster. I love that one. That was really good. So in the short amount of time that we have, let's utilize it in the best way. We go on, Master Yogananda says, lifetime after lifetime, millions of them. Once we reach the human level, then we have free will, and we can really get into trouble. We can go many, many lifetimes. And that's the beauty of kriya-yoga. Kriya-yoga, Yogananda said, one kriya is like eliminating 1 year of karma. It's the airplane route to God. And so when we practice kriya, for those of us in the room who have it already, don't think while you're doing it. Don't be doing the kriya and thinking, oh, I've got to make that phone call and I've got to get here by very soon. Put everything aside. And for those of you who don't have kriya yet, when you're practicing the mantra, Hong Sa, or you're doing the Om technique, or some other practice in our path, or whatever path you're on, give it your fixity of attention, like this Bhagavad Gita reading is saying. Put your concentration into it. And we have to keep working on all fronts. Purify the heart, purify the mind, purify the body. I'll just close by reading a passage from the Holy Science. This is the book that Babaji commissioned Sri Yukteswar to write. Sri Yukteswar is Yogananda's guru. And the first time I read this was when I first came on the path in 1975. And I read every word avidly, concentrated, the best of my ability. And I got to the end, I said, I didn't understand anything. But I keep trying. And in recent decades, I've gotten a lot more out of it. So I would suggest that you forget about reading the introduction if you're new to this book, and just dive into the main part, because there's a lot of very esoteric teachings in the beginning, which are wonderful, but they can really put you off and go, oh, I'm not going to be able to do this. So Sri Yukteswar is talking, but the funny part about it, and Swami would say this too, it's a highly intellectual book in many ways. And then at the end of it, he says, I hope I have proven that you can't take a single step on the spiritual path without love. But when you read it knowing that, you see all the times love is mentioned or referred to. And moreover, this is very important. He talks about taking inside the teachings of the Guru affectionately, following the Guru's advice and everything that he tells you to do affectionately. He mentions affectionately like 10 times in here. It's very sweet, and I think that's important for us, especially those of us who have been on the path for a long time. it's not just rules and regulations. It's following and changing ourselves because of love. And that's what Sri Yukteswar is saying here. When love, this heavenly gift of nature, appears in the heart, it removes all causes of excitation from the system, the body, and cools it down to a perfectly normal state, invigorating the vital powers, expels all foreign materials. That love is purifying us, heart, mind, and soul. It thereby makes man perfectly healthy in body and mind and enables him to understand properly the guidance of nature. It helps him to understand his nature and everyone else's nature too, he goes on to say. With the help of this developed love, man becomes fortunate in being able to gain the godlike company of a guru and is saved forever. Without this love, man cannot live in the natural way, neither can he keep company with the guru for his own welfare. He becomes often excited by the foreign matters taken into his system through mistakes in understanding the guidance of nature, and in consequence, he suffers in body and mind. He can never find any peace whatever, and his life becomes a burden. Hence, the culture of this love, the heavenly gift, is the principal requisite for the attainment of holy salvation. It is impossible for man to advance a single step towards that union without it. So let us seek to fill ourselves with that divine love. And the most important thing, so I'll end with this instead. The most important thing is loving other people. And I ran across this story that Swami told about getting rid of the carping spirit, finding fault with everything and being negative. We have to always be positive and loving. And so Swami says, I remember when I was in the Porziuncola in Assisi, Italy, where St. Francis died, I prayed to him, and all of a sudden, I felt this intense sweetness come over me. I had never imagined that human nature could be sweet. And I said, please tell me, how is it possible to have such sweetness? And the answer that was given, never judging another human being, by seeing all as your brothers and sisters, seeing them all as your very own, and above all, by never judging. So that's a key to our purification. And may we all feel that divine love and sweetness.
I was able to get a digital copy of the Holy Science, and some years ago when I was preparing for a talk, I did a search on how many times the word love shows up, and I think it was 47, and affectionately came up like 10 or 12 times in there. I mean, it's really there. It's like woven all through. It's just that there is so much particular spiritual teaching and esoterica that it sort of gets lost a little bit, but it's definitely a key part of what he's trying to express. Yesterday we had the blessing of a wonderful talk by Nayaswamis Dharmadas, and his topic was the book that his wife wrote, Training in Divine Love. or trained in divine love. Yeah. And I wanted to just touch on something that he told, or rather he read a story that was written from her point of view. And since not everyone is here, I'll just sort of review the story. It's a very human situation that happened and that happens. So they were relatively newly married. This is in the first year of their marriage. And they had traveled to Oregon, to the Northwest, to do a bunch of workshops. The workshops were over. Bharat is a world-famous naturalist and wrote the book Sharing Nature for Children. So it was related to that. And they were on their way home from Oregon and had stopped in a town, it might have been Eugene, and were going to do some errands. And she had something she needed from a department store, and while she was there, he was going to go to a nearby bookstore and look for books, which was an interest that he had. And so they agreed to meet back at the department store where she was in an hour. So she finished what she was doing relatively soon. She came outside and started meditating and figured, I'll just practice Hong Sa for a while until he comes. Well, the hour was up and he wasn't there. And another 20 minutes went by and he still wasn't there. And she got a little bit afraid, or she was aware that that was a potential direction. She was actually feeling a lot of peace from the practice of Hong Sa, but she could see that this pathway of potential opened up. Well, some more time went by, maybe another 20 minutes or so went by, and he still hadn't come. And at this point, yet a third option opened up, and this time it was anger. Because where is he? What is he doing? Did he forget? Did he just get lost and caught up, et cetera, et cetera? And finally she decided, well, she wasn't going to go down either of those. She hung in with the practice of Hong Sa. But she thought, okay, well, if another hour goes by, then I'm going to get up and I'm going to do something. And she's, thinking all this through in the moment, she realized, I have $10 in my pocket. This is long before the era of cell phones, long before the era of GPS and share my location type stuff. Not there, not happening, not unless you have a really good intuition. So just as the second hour was about to be up, he arrived. Now, she didn't know his story and he didn't know her story. And it turned out that he thought he came out of the bookstore and went to the department store where she was, except it was the wrong department store. And so he was faithfully waiting, meanwhile having all the little thoughts of, women love to shop, and maybe she got carried away, and blah, 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 And he finally got hungry. He decided to go to a restaurant, bought 2 lunches to go, and ate his. And as he's walking back to the car, it's like, wait a minute, it's very interesting what he said. The trees don't look familiar. It wasn't that the store didn't look familiar, it was the trees didn't look familiar. So then it was like, oh, maybe I'm in the wrong place. So he drove around the corner. They had to look at a map briefly once. Those things called maps that people used to use. It's like, they had a glimpse at a map, and that's the only reference that they had. Well, so they finally meet up again. And, there's a little conversation that happens. So, where were you? What were you doing? What happened? But note, she saw those. This to me is a very teachable example because it's something that happens. It happens in every romantic comedy movie that was ever made. Sooner or later, there is a massive misunderstanding. He thinks one thing, she thinks the other thing, and it's just total miss. until, it all gets sorted out and figured out. But in between, see, the practice of devotion. Devotion is a concept. Oh, it sounds really nice. It sounds really sweet. It sounds wonderful. Till you realize that devotion is hard. Devotion is, I would even go to so far as to say devotion is expensive. Devotion means I have to take responsibility for what I feel and what I experience on the inside. Not for the stuff that's happening outside, because there's going to be situations where we don't know the answer. She didn't know where he was for an hour. Did something disastrous happen? That's the fear part. Is he just spacing out? That's the anger part. And meanwhile, he's wondering, Jesus, she just shopping, like crazy here? I mean, it's like, well, now what? She's she's 7 hours from home or 8 hours from home with $10 in her pocket. I mean, I can tell you from living in that era, $10 is not a lot of money. Well, it was a little more then, but it still wasn't enough to get you home. And, it's like, where, it's not like she can just call him, where are you? What are you doing? It requires an inward discipline. And it requires us always checking back inside and being aware of and calling to God. It requires that intimate connection that takes time to develop. God is always waiting for it, but we're not always so interested. I had to look up the word ramified because, ramifications are sort of like the implications, but it's also consequences. The spreading out, the branching of consequences is to have something be ramified. And if you think of someone without fixity of spiritual purpose, their energy sort of wants to go sideways. Well, what happens when your energy goes sideways in a relationship? It's like, well, you didn't, whatever. And it's like, no, well, but you didn't. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, it's all about you. It's not about me on the inside. And that's the discipline. And I so much appreciated that you could follow her mental process. It wasn't just, oh, I sat and I did some meditation and oh, it was wonderful and the sky opened up and the heavens and God came to me and I understood and yada, yada, yada. No, it was like, blast it all, where is he? And, but we all face that unknown at some time in our lives. And it's not automatic when we're going to understand. That's the part that is challenging, or that's a part that's challenging. And we have to just sort of say, as an act of faith, I am willing and waiting to be instructed. I'm waiting to understand. I'm striving to understand. But I accept the fact that I don't understand yet. And I will at some point. It's one of these little subtexts. There's a feature of some of the Indian languages, and the Indians in the room, forgive me, because I'll probably figure out a way to muff this somehow, but like the name Paramhansa Yogananda is apparently more properly spelled with an extra A in it, Paramahansa, so that it can be pronounced. But the if you just say that much of it, the is assumed or it's implied by the first part. And it's like we say that and the extra little piece comes. It's like and there's a reason why I was going down this trail and I can't remember what it was now. Yogananda used to sign his name without the extra A, and then later on scholars came and said, well, but it would be more properly spelled with the extra A inside of there. And there was a really good reason why I was going down this trail, and I still can't think what it was. But we have to be willing to let the other shoe fall in its own time. And that's hard to do, because there are times when we just don't know. It's fascinating to look back through the years and see letters that Swamiji wrote. I'll just give you one random example. We were living in Seattle at the time when the Gulf War started back in 1992. And I want to say 92, it could have been 91, but anyway, somewhere right in there. And Swamiji immediately wrote a letter and sent it out to the colonies and to, members and friends around the world. And nobody knew, what are we headed into? Are we headed into World War III right now? And he had to address those unknowns in the letter. And he addressed the spiritual principles involved. What is involved here? And what can we do? And of course, one of the things that we can do is be centered. Develop our own devotion. Develop our own connection with the divine. And know that there's a bigger picture. There's always a bigger picture. But we tend, in those situations, to tunnel into what's happening right now and who can I blame for why I feel so blasted uncomfortable? It's like, what am I going to do? And devotion says, I take responsibility for what's happening inside of me. And it sounds almost irrelevant. It sounds like, but the people who are, working on some massive movement of, saving the rainforest or something, those are the people who are really changing the planet. Well, they're doing their part too. It's not to take away from that. But done without the inward part, it tends to end in some sort of disaster in one way or another, or at least it doesn't reach the full fruition that it could if the people have that individual commitment and individual connection to the divine. And that I'll just conclude by saying that's one of the things that I really appreciated about having Bharat here yesterday, is that you could see, and I've known him for, the better part of 45 years now, you could see his dedication. There's not a lot else about his life. His life is now, a lot of it is focused on the legacy of Anandi, his wife, who passed away, and her mission and the words that she's presented, and of course his own mission, which has been sharing nature with the world. And there's just not a lot else going on for him. There's just he's not interested in a whole lot else, which is to say he's focused. And that's what all of us have the potential to be. Because if our interests are endlessly ramified because we haven't achieved fixity of spiritual purpose, then we're just heading off in all directions at once, and there's kind of no focus to any of it. And it's not a happy place to be. So let's live in a happy place, which is to say a focused place, which is to say in devotion to and with and for God, so that we can feel that connection. Because everybody on the planet wants to feel love, wants to feel loved, as in love coming to them, but also wants to feel love flowing from them. It's just a natural part of humanity. And having that connection to God and knowing that the source of it is God means that it can always flow, even when we don't understand, even when it's difficult, even when we're not sure. If we have that connection, that flow can always be there.
John renouncing all, left his home. wrapped in solitude, far from men's ways, roaming across desert sands, seeking God's truth. Long years he spoke only with God, till silent of soul, wisdom did fill the ache of his heart. Then he